I used to believe my life was solid, built on hard work, stability, and a sense of control. That belief shattered the moment I stepped into the airport, but I didn't see it coming. Not then. It was a Sunday morning like any other, calm, predictable, structured. I had my routine. Wake up early, make a pot of coffee, check a few emails before the chaos of the day. My wife, Vanessa, was already on her phone, scrolling through Instagram, liking photos, replying to comments. Her morning routine was just as predictable, except hers revolved around social media and maintaining the illusion of our perfect family. I didn't argue. Not anymore. For years, I had played the part of the successful husband, a corporate strategist with a six-figure salary, a luxury home in Santa Monica, and a wife who looked like she walked out of a magazine cover. We had twin daughters, Sophie and Claire, who were 5 years old and full of life. They were my world, my anchor. But even as I got them ready that morning, brushing Claire's curls, helping Sophie find her favorite sneakers, I sensed something was off. Vanessa was too eager, too cheerful. "This trip is going to be amazing," she said, sipping her oat milk latte, not even looking at me. "We'll take so many pictures. The twins will love the Disney hotel." She spoke as if we were guests in our own life, as if the trip was more for her followers than for our family. I had grown used to that. The posed pictures, the curated perfection, the captions that never quite matched reality. I had once thought our love was real, but now, I wasn't sure. Still, I said nothing. I never said anything. I had learned a long time ago that silence was easier. As we packed, I glanced at the credit card statement on my phone, something I had started doing in secret. There it was again, designer purchases, spa treatments, private chauffeur services. The kind of spending that made me wonder where the money was coming from because I sure as hell hadn't approved it. But again, I let it go. For the sake of the family. By noon, we were ready to leave. Vanessa barely glanced at the twins as they excitedly clutched their backpacks, but she made sure to check her makeup in the hallway mirror before stepping out. I should have known. I should have seen it, the way she lingered by the door, checking her phone again and again. The way she smirked when I told her I'd drive separately to the airport since I had to pick up something from the office first. "You always have work, don't you?" she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. And yet, I brushed it off. I still believed we were leaving together. I didn't realize in that moment that Vanessa had already planned everything. I didn't know that while I was checking my emails one last time, she was boarding the plane without me. I didn't know that my daughters, the two little girls who trusted us to protect them, were about to be abandoned in an airport terminal while their mother flew off to paradise. If I had known, I wouldn't have wasted my time believing in the life we had built. Because by the time I walked into the airport, that life? It was already gone. The moment I stepped into Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, I felt the first prick of unease. It wasn't the usual pre-flight stress, the kind that comes from security lines and last-minute gate changes. No, this was something deeper. The airport was buzzing with travelers, families in matching vacation shirts, honeymooners taking selfies, kids dragging stuffed animals through the terminal. It was a scene of excitement, movement, anticipation. But for me, something felt wrong. I wheeled my suitcase to the check-in counter, pulled up my reservation on my phone, and handed over my passport. The airline employee, a young woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, typed something into her computer. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment too long. Then, she frowned. "Sir, your reservation isn't in the system." I blinked. "That's not possible. My wife booked it. We're flying out today, Hawaii, family trip." More typing. More silence. "Your reservation was canceled," she said finally. I let out a short laugh, waiting for the part where she fixed the mistake. But she didn't. "Canceled?" I repeated. "There must be some kind of error." "My wife," that's when she cut me off. "Your wife has already boarded." The world slowed. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the words. Vanessa boarded? Without me? I pulled out my phone, my hands suddenly unsteady, and opened my messages. There it was. A single text from Vanessa. "You should be taking care of the kids." Attached was a photo that changed everything. My daughters, Sophie and Claire, sitting on a cold metal bench near the airport Starbucks, their little legs dangling over the edge. Alone. Sophie was clutching her pink teddy bear, the one she never slept without. Claire's face was blotchy, red, the telltale sign of a child who had been crying for too long. I forgot how to breathe. A ringing sound filled my ears. Blood pounded behind my temples. "Sir," the airline employee asked, her voice muffled like she was speaking through water. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. Because I wasn't. I turned and ran through the terminal like a madman. My mind was racing, my body moving on autopilot, scanning every bench, every seating area. I shoved past people, ignored the confused looks, the irritated muttering of travelers I bumped into. Then, "Auntie Lynn?" The small, broken voice cut through the noise. I spun around and saw them. Sophie and Claire, exactly where they were in the photo, sitting in the same spot, still abandoned, still alone. Claire sniffled and wiped her nose on her sleeve. Sophie's grip on the teddy bear was so tight her knuckles were white. I dropped to my knees in front of them. "Daddy's here." Sophie exhaled, a shuddering breath, and threw herself into my arms. Claire followed, burying her face into my neck, her little body trembling against mine. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to lie, to tell them their mother was coming back, that this was a misunderstanding. But I couldn't. I couldn't form the words. I heard a voice behind me. "Sir, is everything okay?" I turned and saw an airport security officer, his expression a mix of concern and suspicion. He wasn't the only one watching. People were staring now. Travelers whispering, mothers clutching their own children a little tighter, airline staff exchanging glances. I must have looked insane, kneeling on the floor, clutching two sobbing little girls, my own face probably just as pale as theirs. No, not insane. Broken. The officer stepped closer. "Sir, can I ask what's going on here?" I opened my mouth, then hesitated. How was I supposed to explain this? That my wife, the woman I built a life with, the mother of my children, had just abandoned them? That while she was sipping champagne at 30,000 feet, I was on my knees, holding our daughters, wondering how the hell I was supposed to fix this? I swallowed hard. "I need to file a report," I said, my voice hoarse. The officer nodded. "Let's take you to the security office. We'll make sure the girls are taken care of." I lifted Sophie and Claire into my arms. They clung to me like I was the only thing holding them to this world. And maybe I was. As I followed the officer through the terminal, the truth finally hit me in full force. Vanessa wasn't coming back. Not for me. And not for them. The walk to the airport security office felt longer than any walk I had ever taken. Not because of the distance, but because of what it meant. Each step cemented the truth. Vanessa had abandoned Sophie and Claire. My mind kept trying to reject the thought, trying to make sense of it, but there was no logical explanation, no justification. The girls clung to me, their tiny hands fisting my shirt like I might disappear too. And I wouldn't blame them for thinking that. By the time we reached the security office, my breath was coming in short, controlled bursts. I had to hold it together. Not for myself, for them. The officer, a no-nonsense woman named Sergeant Dawson, gestured for us to sit. She crouched to the twins' level, offering them soft smiles. "Hi there, sweethearts. Can I get you anything? Some hot chocolate? A snack?" Claire didn't respond. She just pressed her face deeper into my chest. Sophie, ever so slightly braver, shook her head. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" she whispered, her voice small, fragile. My throat closed. I had no answer, not one that wouldn't shatter them further. I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay even. "We'll talk about that soon, baby. I promise." Sergeant Dawson sat across from me, tapping something into a tablet before looking up. "Mr. Reed, we need to file an official report. Your wife, Vanessa, was the one who left the children alone?" I exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of my nose. Even saying it out loud felt surreal. "Yes," I said finally. "She boarded the flight to Hawaii without me and left them." Dawson's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. Disgust. It was the same look I had seen on the airline employee's face when she realized what had happened. The same look I would probably keep seeing. And you have no idea why she did this? I hesitated. I could lie. I could tell them I had no clue. But I did. Not the full picture, not yet, but enough. Vanessa had been spending money like it grew on trees. I had seen the warning signs. The unopened bills she stuffed into drawers, the way she changed the subject every time I mentioned finances, the designer handbags still in their boxes, untouched. Still, I hadn't imagined this. No, I said instead. I didn't know she was planning this. Dawson nodded, jotting down notes. Do you have someone who can take care of the girls while we investigate? I looked down at Sophie and Claire, still clinging to me like their lives depended on it. No. Even if I had someone, even if my mother wasn't on a church retreat halfway across the country, I wasn't leaving them with anyone else. They're staying with me. Dawson gave a small nod of approval, but there was something else in her expression. Pity. I need to make a few calls, she said, rising. Child Protective Services will need to be involved, but considering the circumstances, I doubt they'll push for separation. Good. Because I wouldn't let them. As Dawson stepped out of the room, I turned my attention back to my daughters. Claire had stopped crying, but her small hands still gripped my sleeve like a lifeline. Sophie was staring at the door, her bottom lip tucked between her teeth, thinking. I knew that look. She was trying to figure it out. Sophie, I murmured, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. What is it, baby? She looked up at me, her big blue eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Mommy said she'd be right back, she said softly. But she didn't come back. A sharp pain shot through my chest. How do you explain betrayal to a 5-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that the person who was supposed to love her most chose to leave? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with one hand, still holding Claire close with the other. A new message flashed on the screen. From Vanessa. I tapped it open, my stomach twisting. The children are in your care now. The 529 plan documents are in the safe at home. This is our last chance. 529 plan? The college savings fund? What the hell was she talking about? My jaw clenched as I reread the words. Last chance. It sounded so final. Like she knew she wasn't coming back. Like she had planned this down to the last detail. The room felt smaller, suffocating. What the hell had Vanessa done? I didn't have time to process. Because then, another message came in. This time, it wasn't from Vanessa. It was a photo attachment. I opened it, and everything inside me went ice cold. It was a picture of Vanessa and a man. Not just any man. Marcus, her business partner. The one she always claimed was just a friend. They were sitting at a bar, clinking glasses of champagne, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Like they hadn't just abandoned their children. I had thought the worst had already happened. I stared at the photo for too long, my grip tightening around my phone until my knuckles turned white. Vanessa, smiling, champagne glass in hand, sitting beside Marcus, the man she swore was just a business friend. They were already in Hawaii, already celebrating, and she had sent it to me like a parting gift, a final, unapologetic middle finger. My stomach twisted. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, an erratic, angry rhythm. How could she abandon Sophie and Claire and then gloat about it? I forced myself to exhale, to push the raw, boiling rage down. Not now. Not in front of the girls. Claire had finally drifted off, her tiny body slumped against me, exhausted from crying. Sophie, however, was still wide awake. She watched me carefully, her big blue eyes filled with questions she was too afraid to ask. I had to hold it together. I tucked my phone away, smoothing her hair gently. Daddy? Her voice was quiet, hesitant. Are we still going on the trip? The words stabbed right through me. She still thought this was just a mistake, that her mother was coming back. I swallowed hard. Not today, baby. Her little brows furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. But Mommy said she was wrong. My voice came out harsher than I intended. Sophie flinched. I immediately softened. I mean, Mommy made a bad decision, but you're safe now. I promise. I didn't know if that was true, because at that moment, I had no idea what Vanessa's real plan was. But I was going to find out. I carried both girls out of LAX an hour later, stepping into the humid California air as my mind spun. Where do I even start? First, I needed to get them home. Then I needed answers. By the time I settled them into their beds, both too exhausted to argue, I was already making calls. The first was to my lawyer. No one divorces a man without his knowledge, abandons his kids, and steals his money without consequences. The second was to a financial investigator. Because if Vanessa had drained our daughter's education fund like her text hinted, then this was so much worse than I thought. I poured myself a stiff drink as I sat at the dining table, my laptop open. A part of me hesitated. Did I really want to see how deep this went? Or did I want to keep pretending that Vanessa had just made a mistake? No more pretending. I pulled up our bank statements. My breath caught in my throat. Gone. The 529 plan, meant for Sophie and Claire's college fund, drained to $1. Over $500,000, withdrawn in 3 months. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions. Luxury purchases. Chanel, Louis Vuitton. Private jets. Transfers to offshore accounts. I checked my personal savings. The account I had built before Vanessa ever came into my life. It had been untouched for years. Until last week. $75,000, gone. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. I felt sick. This wasn't just reckless spending. This was theft. And then, another thought hit me. If Vanessa was capable of stealing from her own children, what else had she done? The next morning, I drove straight to Vanessa's office. Or at least, what used to be her office. Because when I arrived, the doors were locked. The company had shut down. I knocked anyway. A man, mid-40s, tired eyes, disheveled suit, opened it a crack. Sorry, we're closed, he said, rubbing his temples. I'm looking for Vanessa Reed. His expression changed, darkened. Yeah? So is everyone else? I frowned. What do you mean? He sighed, stepping back. You'd better come in. 20 minutes later, I sat in a half-empty boardroom, my mind reeling. Vanessa had lied about everything. The business she claimed was booming, it was bankrupt. Her business partner, Marcus? Not just her lover, her accomplice. They had been funneling money from investors, employees, even her own family, and now they were gone. I clenched my jaw, trying to process it all. She hadn't just left us. She had burned our entire life down before walking away. And worst of all, I had been too blind to see it. That night, as I tucked Sophie and Claire into bed, I sat with them a little longer. Sophie turned to me, sleepily. Mommy hasn't called yet. I forced a smile. No, baby. She hasn't. Claire blinked up at me. Is she coming home soon? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, sweetheart. Her little lips trembled. I stroked her hair. But I promise, I will never leave you. She sighed, curling up against my chest. I held them both, and in that moment, I made a vow. Vanessa thought she had one. She thought she had outplayed me, but she forgot one thing. She left her mess behind, and I was about to make damn sure she paid for it. The next morning, I was already awake before the sun rose. Not because I wanted to be, because I hadn't slept. The weight of what Vanessa had done pressed down on me like a physical force, making my head throb. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was criminal. The college fund? Gone. Our savings? Looted. Her company? Bankrupt. And Vanessa? Nowhere to be found. No more waiting. No more second-guessing. It was time to bring in the law. I was on the phone with my lawyer when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. 7:42 a.m. Too early for anything good. I opened the door, and my stomach dropped. 2 men in dark suits, badges clipped to their belts, stood on my doorstep. FBI. Mr. Reed? I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. One of them, Agent Keller, introduced himself. He was in his late 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that told me he'd seen a lot. The other, Agent Dawson, was younger but just as serious. We need to talk about your wife, Keller said, taking a seat at my dining table. I already knew where this was going. I assume this is about the offshore accounts, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Dawson lifted an eyebrow. So you're aware? I nodded. I checked our financial records. She drained everything. The kids' education fund, my personal savings, even her company's accounts. Keller exhaled sharply. It's worse than that, Mr. Reed. I leaned forward. How much worse? Keller slid a file across the table. I opened it, and my hands tightened around the pages. Wire transfers, Cayman Islands, fake business expenses, fraudulent loans. Vanessa wasn't just spending recklessly. She was laundering money. I clenched my jaw. She knew exactly what she was doing. Dawson nodded. It was planned months in advance. The offshore accounts, the transfers, the escape. Escape. The word stung. She hadn't just abandoned the girls. She had abandoned her entire life. Mr. Reed, Keller continued, your wife's flight records show she arrived in Honolulu yesterday morning. I already knew that. But what you don't know, Dawson added, is that she and Marcus booked a one-way ticket to the Caribbean. I felt my stomach drop. She wasn't just leaving me, I murmured. She was disappearing. Keller gave me a hard look. She wasn't planning to come back. Not for you. Not for the kids. A deep, cold rage settled in my chest. I had let this woman into my life. I had trusted her. I had built a family with her. And she had treated us like an inconvenience. She hadn't just left us. She had erased us. Keller tapped his pen against the table. We're formally opening an investigation. At this point, Vanessa is facing multiple federal charges. Wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and, most importantly, child abandonment. I inhaled sharply. What happens next? Dawson answered. We're issuing an international warrant. She won't be able to hide for long. She thinks she's untouchable, I muttered. Keller's mouth twitched into a smirk. That's what they all think. Until the cuffs go on. The moment the agents left, I locked the door and stood there in the silence of my home. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. Vanessa had walked out, but her mess was everywhere. I turned, my eyes landing on the couch where Sophie and Claire had curled up the night before. Their little shoes were still by the door, their drawings scattered across the coffee table. They had no idea how close they came to being left with nothing. How close I had come to losing them. Not a damn chance. Vanessa thought she could run. She thought she could disappear into paradise, while I was left to pick up the pieces. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I was going to bring her back, and when she returned, she'd wish she never left. I had spent the past 48 hours in a haze of legal meetings, police interviews, and sleepless nights. Every minute, every second, I waited for the inevitable call. The one that would tell me it was over. That Vanessa had been caught. When it finally came, I almost didn't believe it. I was in my kitchen, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of me, when my phone rang. The caller ID flashed. FBI, Agent Keller. I grabbed it immediately. Tell me you have her. Keller's voice was steady, but I could hear the faintest edge of satisfaction. We got her. I exhaled, my grip tightening around the phone. Where? Hawaii. Hilton Hawaiian Village. We caught them having breakfast by the pool. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. Vanessa and Marcus, sipping mimosas, eating eggs Benedict, living their best life. While our daughters cried themselves to sleep. I pushed back from the table, pacing the kitchen. Tell me how it went down. Keller didn't disappoint. It had all happened just hours ago. Vanessa and Marcus were seated at a poolside cabana, completely at ease, their sunglasses shielding them from the Hawaiian sun. They had spent the past day flaunting their new life. Posting Instagram stories, drinking cocktails, pretending they hadn't just abandoned two innocent kids. What they didn't know was that the FBI had already secured an international warrant. And the moment Vanessa tapped her credit card at the hotel's front desk, it triggered an alert. The agents moved in fast. Vanessa was mid-sip when they surrounded the table. Vanessa Reed. Marcus Wright. FBI. You're under arrest. But I want you to know something. I waited. Most of the time, in these cases, the Los Angeles County Courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the hallways, cameras flashing as people jostled for a glimpse of the case that had gripped the city. The trial of Vanessa Reed. Once a wealthy socialite, now a disgraced criminal. I adjusted my tie, and exhaled slowly. I hadn't slept much. The weight of this day had sat heavy on my chest, but I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for justice. For Sophie and Claire. For the daughters she had abandoned like an inconvenience. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa sat at the defense table, expression blank, posture perfect. She was trying to look calm, trying to act like she wasn't about to lose everything. I knew that look. It was the same one she used when she lied to my face. But there was something different now. The arrogance wasn't fully there anymore. Because this time, she wasn't in control. The prosecutor was relentless. They played the airport security footage for the jury, the moment Vanessa and Marcus walked away from Sophie and Claire. Not a glance back. Not a hesitation. Nothing. Just two parents abandoning their children like they were luggage. The jury stiffened. The courtroom fell into a dead silence. And for the first time, I saw Vanessa break. Her face barely moved, but I caught the way her jaw clenched, the flicker of panic in her eyes. She knew. This was the moment she lost. Then came her turn to speak. She stood slowly, smoothing her prison-issued beige uniform. The same woman who once wouldn't be caught dead wearing last season's fashion. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, calculated. "Your Honor," she said, blinking rapidly, forcing tears. "I never wanted any of this. I lost control. I made mistakes, but I never meant to hurt my children." She turned toward me, her gaze pleading. "Jonathan, please." I didn't move, didn't blink, because I had heard this exact tone before. When she wanted money, when she wanted to manipulate a situation, when she wanted out. But today, there was no way out. The prosecutor stepped forward, voice sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Reed," she said, flipping through the files in front of her, "you're claiming this was all a mistake?" Vanessa nodded, playing the victim. "Yes. Then let's review the facts." She turned to the jury. "You drained over $500,000 from your children's college fund." Vanessa's shoulders tightened. "You opened offshore accounts, forged signatures, stole money from your own mother-in-law." A murmur rippled through the spectators. Vanessa kept blinking, like she could cry her way out of this. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. "And then, when it all fell apart, you abandoned your daughters at an airport and tried to flee to the Caribbean. That was it. The final blow." The jury's faces hardened. The judge folded his hands, eyes narrowing. Vanessa knew. She was done. "Would the defendants please rise?" the judge said. Vanessa and Marcus stood. Her fingers trembled at her sides. Marcus, the coward, wouldn't even look up. The judge exhaled. "Vanessa Reed, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal prison." A gasp swept through the room. Vanessa's body swayed. "No." Marcus' sentence came next, 15 years. But all I could focus on was Vanessa. Her hands gripped the table, her face pale. "Your Honor, please," she tried, voice shaking. The judge didn't even look at her. "The court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. It was over. As the bailiff approached, Vanessa suddenly turned to me. "Jonathan," she whispered, real tears falling now. "Please." I stood, fixed my suit jacket, and walked out, because for the first time in our entire relationship, her words meant nothing. Outside, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Reed, do you have a statement?" I paused. Then, voice steady, I said, "This isn't a victory. This is justice." And then I went home, because there were 2 little girls waiting for me. And they were the only thing that mattered now. For the first time in a long time, I woke up without the weight of Vanessa pressing down on my chest. She was gone. Not just from my house. Not just from my life. From our future. She was sitting in a prison cell, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching the sunlight spill through the windows as Sophie and Claire giggled over their cereal. It was quiet. It was simple. It was everything we had lost. And it was finally ours again. The morning after the trial, I had made a decision. No more waiting. No more putting things off because life had been too chaotic, uncertain, broken. I was rebuilding. For them. For me. The first thing I did was transform the guest room. It had always been meant as a temporary space, a place for them to sleep while I figured things out. But this wasn't temporary anymore. This was home. I painted the walls, soft lilac for Sophie, sky blue for Claire. Let them pick their own bedding. Sophie chose stars. Claire picked unicorns. We built bookshelves. We hung glow-in-the-dark stickers on the ceiling. We filled the room with stuffed animals, coloring books, and warmth. By the time we were done, I stood in the doorway and just watched them. Sophie ran her hand over the quilt on her new bed, her face unreadable. Claire hugged her stuffed bear tight, eyes wide. Finally, Sophie looked up. "Is this really ours?" Her voice was small, hopeful. I knelt beside her, placing my hand over my heart. Forever. That night, I tucked them in, pressing a kiss to each of their foreheads. Claire reached for my hand. "Daddy?" I squeezed her tiny fingers. "Yeah, baby?" Her voice was sleepy, barely above a whisper. "We don't have to leave, right?" My chest tightened. I smoothed a strand of hair from her face. "Never." Sophie stirred, blinking up at me. "Even if Mommy comes back?" I swallowed hard. "She's not coming back." Claire's lips pressed together. "Good." Sophie didn't say anything, but she smiled. And I knew. They finally felt safe. The biggest change wasn't the house. It wasn't even the legal custody papers I signed the next day, making it official. It was me. I had spent years convincing myself that working hard was enough. That making money, providing a house, sending them to good schools, that was what made me a good father. But now I was learning the small things. I figured out how to braid Claire's hair, badly, at first. I learned that Sophie's favorite sandwich had to be cut into star shapes, no crusts. I showed up to school pickup every day. Because I wasn't just the man who paid the bills anymore. I was Dad. A few weeks later, I got a letter. From Vanessa. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Then I threw it in the trash. Because our story? It wasn't about her anymore. It was about us. And it was just beginning. A year ago, my world collapsed. I stood in an airport, staring at a message from my wife. A message that told me she had abandoned our daughters. I spent months picking up the pieces, unraveling the lies, watching the woman I once trusted turn into someone I didn't recognize. And now I was free. Vanessa was gone. Marcus was gone. The trials, the investigations, the media frenzy, all of it was over. Life had finally settled into something simple, something normal. And then, one morning, my phone rang. And just like that, the past came knocking again. I was in the kitchen, making breakfast, when the call came in. The girls were at the table. Claire was dunking her toast in syrup. Sophie was coloring on a napkin, arguing with herself over which color to use. It was ordinary. Perfect. I glanced at my phone and felt a chill run down my spine. Los Angeles Correctional Facility. I hesitated. For a full 10 seconds, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But some part of me, the part that needed to know, forced me to pick up. I pressed the phone to my ear. Jonathan Reed. The voice on the other end was calm, official. "Mr. Reed, we're calling to inform you that your ex-wife, Vanessa Reed, has been granted parole." I didn't move, didn't breathe. The world around me felt too quiet. "Parole?" I repeated, my voice steady, controlled. "Yes, sir. She was released this morning." I felt something inside me harden. I had known this day would come. Vanessa was too good at playing the victim. Too good at convincing people she was just a woman who made a mistake. But I wasn't the same man she had left behind. Not anymore. 3 days later, she showed up at my doorstep. I had known she would. I had been waiting. When I saw her step out of the car, I barely recognized her. Gone were the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the perfect hair. She wore a plain gray dress, her blonde hair dull, her face bare and tired. She looked small, and for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Weak, powerless, a shadow of the woman who once ruled my life. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "Jonathan." I didn't say a word. She swallowed, glancing at the house. "Are they inside?" I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes. I crushed it. "They don't want to see you." Her face twisted. "Jonathan, please. They're my daughters." I let out a slow breath, then stepped forward, lowering my voice. "No," I said quietly. "They were your daughters. You lost that right the day you walked away from them." Tears welled in her eyes. You weren't sorry when you drained their college fund. You weren't sorry when you booked a one-way flight to the Caribbean. And you sure as hell weren't sorry when you sent me a picture of them sitting alone in an airport. Her lips trembled. You weren't sorry until you got caught? She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. I was scared. I clenched my jaw. No, I said. You were selfish. She tried again. I just want to see them. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. I had spent years trapped under her control, believing that I was powerless, believing that I had to bend to her will. Not anymore. I looked her in the eyes and said the words I should have said a long time ago. Go. She stiffened. You can't do this. I stepped closer. Go, Vanessa. She hesitated. One last attempt to read me, to find a weakness. But there was nothing left for her here, and she knew it. Finally, she turned, walked back to the car, didn't look back. And as I watched her drive away for the last time, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not regret. Not relief. Just peace. That night, I sat on the couch with Sophie and Claire, watching a Disney movie. Claire curled up against my side. Daddy? Yeah, baby? She yawned. We'll always be together, right? I kissed the top of her head. Always. Sophie smiled, squeezing my hand. And as I sat there, surrounded by the only family that mattered, I knew one thing for sure. Vanessa was gone. But we were just getting started.